Hello, community. So this video, I want to do a tag response. It's a Happy Council Gamers. What is your favorite controller? And after I watched that video, I sat down with all my controllers. It was really hard to limit it down to one controller. I'm going to show more than one controller because I have more than one favorite controller. And to be honest with you, there's so many great controllers, it was hard. I mean, there's certain controllers I could dismiss off the bat. The original Xbox controller, can't call it Xbox One now. The original Xbox controller was too big for me. I didn't like it. 3DO controller, despite the fact that I have fond memories of 3DO, didn't like the controller. I had dismissed the Dreamcast controller, even though I don't hate that controller. I automatically dismissed the N64 controller, even though I love the N64. I have a lot of memories of it. I don't like the design of the controller, though I've learned to play with it. Or the GameCube controller. But before I get to my favorite, I got kind of like 6 controllers I want to show really briefly. And this first one would have to be on my list of top 3 controllers, no matter what generation you're on. And that was simply the PlayStation controller. Whether it be PlayStation 1, 2, or 3, the controller hasn't changed except for the fact that it had 6 axis to the PS3, and obviously it's wireless. Now I remember when the PS1 first came out, I first had hands-on with this controller, and I looked at all the buttons and I went, there's too many buttons. Like, there's no way, I mean, it was intimidating. You're like, there's no way I'm ever going to learn how to play this controller. There's 8 buttons, plus the 2 joysticks. How am I going to control all 10 of these things, or think of where they are, and play a game at the same time? Little did I know with the developers and practice that you learned it, right? That even to this day, without looking at the controller, I know that X is on the bottom, triangles on the top, squares to the left, and circles to the right. I had to look because I completely forgot what the last one was, but circles to the right. That when you play a game, I don't even have to look at the controller anymore because I automatically know where they were, because for 3 generations, this controller has been the same. And this is still, again, it fits so perfectly in my hand, and it's so easy to play with, that this goes like in my top 3 controllers of all time, period. It's a great controller. Great design. Why would you need to change it, actually, in my opinion? But let's get into another controller that I have very fond memories of. Even though a lot of people are going to say, I love the Genesis controller, I do have a little place in my heart, despite the fact that my controller doesn't want to let go of it, because I have another one next to it, like the wires always tangle, the Super Nintendo controller. It just fit better in my hand. You know, you have the 2 flipper buttons and the 4 buttons on the side. And I was excited when I saw the 4 buttons directly compared to the PlayStation 1. I'm like, oh man, think of all the different things they can make you do, you know? And they did use these buttons, and Super Nintendo controller is a great controller. Now, honestly, it's probably not far away from me than the original controller of the old Nintendo Entertainment System. I love the design of this controller. I love how it fits the design of the original system. And this controller was basically, for me, indestructible. I had thrown these controllers, twisted these controllers, smashed these controllers, stepped on these controllers, and despite all the damage I did, these things always worked. And I just have such a fondness for this controller. You know, when I play games on the NES, it's not the controller that lets me down. It's the programming on the games that usually let me down, because the programming of the games weren't meant to properly respond with this controller at times. And that's why when I play NES games and I play them and I realize, you know, even though I'm doing things on this controller, the game's not doing it, it's always the programming to me, not the controller. Some people may think differently. But when you talk about, quite frankly, when you talk about, like, okay, you like those controllers, but what would honestly be number 2 on your list? Now, some people put these under joysticks, but I'm sorry. They're still my favorite controllers to play with when I play on these systems to this day, and that is the Super Advantage and the original Advantage. Besides these things being all metal and making you feel like you're playing an arcade stick, because they're so heavy, you're like, oh man, this is like playing an arcade stick. This is like being in the arcade. The joystick made all the difference in the world when you play the games. Forget the turbo. The turbo, you know, at first you play with it, but eventually you're like, I don't need turbo anymore, right? And these controllers are just so much fun and so comfortable to use. That they're still my favorite. And one of the things I love the most about these controllers, and this is of course the second iteration of the Super Nintendo, not this is, you know, not the one this actually takes favor of, but these, you see how the colors designs are the same? And again, this takes place more of the other Super Nintendo than this one. But I love how, you know, they match the system. You know, those little buttons that were of course the buttons on the other Super Nintendo, just little design things like that were so awesome. And of course, when you go to the Advantage controller, again, same situation. Looks, just like the system. Which, thinking about it, one thing I didn't bring up about the PlayStation controller, when you talk about PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, the little genius thing that Sony made, how a PlayStation 1 controller would actually plug into a PlayStation 2. That was genius, that a controller from one generation worked to the next, Up to that point, controllers really didn't work that way. And it was a small thing a lot of people don't give Sony credit for. But, when you talk about my favorite controller, and I know this is one a lot of people aren't going to pick, there's a reason why some people don't like this controller. But let's be honest, back in the NES days, at a certain point, Turbo was king. That you and your friends would look at every magazine, every rumor of what controller had the best turbo, and you wanted to get that controller so you could do the best, on like Track and Field 1 and 2, and games like that, where turbo mattered. And that, like, when I put the NES Advantage down, we used to play on that, but truthfully, when we wanted all the turbo we could get in Track and Field, we'd always put in the NES Max. I bought this controller day one it came out, and I love this controller. Now, some people don't like the little, sliding around red thing, but you also have the 4 directional buttons up here, so you don't have to use it. But you can use this. I just loved how, to me, this was a mini NES controller, and I love this controller. I mean, it's a great small controller, and yes, it did have turbo, and this turbo, at least when we played it in our system, was always faster than the Advantage. And this is a controller I absolutely love. Now, granted, let's be honest, the NES had a lot of different first-party and third-party controllers and accessories that, to me, when I think of accessories and controllers, it's always the NES era for me. So I hope you guys liked what my favorite controller was. I'd love to hear your guys' comments below. Love to hear you guys go leave a video response to Happy Console Gamer's video. I'll leave a link to his video below. And I'll see you guys for another video soon. Thanks for watching.